Hi, this is Lynn McCool, and this screencast will discuss collaboration and workflow and the way we can communicate as we are working on a team. Did you know that there's a difference between groups and teams? Groups typically are two or more people interacting and influencing each other, and usually a group is comprised of three with an upward limit of maybe 5 people. That's the ideal size of a group. And a group is just basically a loose collection of individuals. Teams, on the other hand, are what we call smart groups. And teams can be comprised of two or more people who do several things. They share leadership, they create a shared identity, and they plan and talk in advance. So teams are a subset of groups. In other words, teams are groups, but groups are not necessarily teams. One of the ways that groups and teams are different is in the way that they participate in decision making. A group doesn't always talk about ways of making decisions, it just does it. Teams, on the other hand, talk about the proper way to make decisions, and teams are more likely to make decisions about the way the decision making occurs. In other words, it's sort of a meta conversation there, because they're concerned with equality and about how to do their job well. Let's look at a little more in depth at the interactions that individuals have on a team member, and we'll be using something called Tuckman's 4 stages of teaming. So the first stage of teaming is something called forming. This is the get to know you phase, where team members assess strengths and abilities of each other. Next is the storming phase, and this is the phase in which teams learn how to manage conflict with the different individuals on the team. Third is norming, in which team members determine their team roles. And finally, performing, and that is improving the process in ways that the team can improve the quality of the work. Let's look at each one of Tuckman's stages in depth. First, forming. Forming has to do with the roles of team members, and we can have formal roles, such as public roles like elected or appointed officials, an elected role such as a chair or a timekeeper. But we can also have informal roles, and those are the kinds of roles that people bring with them and usually are associated with their personalities. So you might have someone who is very task-oriented, concerned about getting the work done. You may have an individual who is very social, making sure that everyone is feeling included and belonging inside the team. Or you may even on occasion have a disruptive kind of informal role in which this particular person doesn't really want to talk about the items at hand, but they'd rather prefer to talk about other things. The second stage is storming. And as we know, because we don't live in a perfect world, occasionally conflict occurs. And so in the storming phase then, we want to think about how we can carefully plan ahead to minimize the effects of conflict, because conflict will happen. So we want to plan for when it does happen, what should be the appropriate response. And so some of the ways that we can do that is we can define team member responsibilities. So for example, you usually have a team lead or a coordinator. You oftentimes have researchers who are out gathering information. Typically you might have an editor, someone who is making sure that the document is formatted correctly and that there aren't any spelling or punctuation errors, and then a designer, someone who works with the graphics of the document. Another way to carefully plan to minimize conflict is to create a project calendar so that everyone knows the major and minor deadlines and who is responsible for each deadline. To write out a work plan, again, laying out who will be doing what in the project. Agreeing on how conflicts will be resolved. So sometimes people want to resolve a conflict based on efficacy, and sometimes people want to resolve a conflict based on efficiency, and you need to recognize in your own personality which way you tend to lean towards. Is it efficacy, the best optimal solution, or is it efficiency, the quickest fastest way to get something done? And recognizing that about yourself and recognize that about other people can help you to minimize conflict. If, however, all your efforts to minimize conflict have not worked, and so now a conflict has occurred, you can ask yourself a few questions and sort of work yourself through a process to try to problem solve. So first you would ask yourself, what is the problem? Identify what that is, the problem or the task or the opportunity. define it, and then identify and agree on criteria for a solution. So not exactly the solution itself, but just the criteria, what would define a good solution. Then generate as many possible solutions as you can as a team. And then as a team, select a solution, develop implementation, and then develop a review procedure. So those are the basic steps on how to problem solve when conflict does occur. You would also want to establish a procedure and process of workflow and create parameters for decision making, either formally, such as a team contract, or informally by consensus. And again, this helps with your problem solving and task completion parts of the conflict if it should occur. If, however, conflict just gets out of control, so all of these things you've tried and there's still this looming conflict between either two people on the team or one person and many people on the team, what you want to do then is to go outside the team, to choose a mediator, ask both sides to state their position or talk about how they view the problem, identify what the issues are, prioritize those issues from most to least important, and address each issue separately, trying to find middle ground, in other words, places where we can have consensus or agreement, and then write down an agreement that both sides can accept. Hopefully you'll find that the team you're on, you don't have very many problems or conflicts, and if you are able to work through those rather quickly and efficiently and with good result, then you should be able to move into the third phase, which is norming. And in norming, you actually start to identify how you as an individual function on the team, so your team role. And typically those roles can be divided into a few different categories. So we can have people-oriented roles. For example, the coordinator is a more people-oriented role where he or she would set the agenda and suggest a basic roadmap or plan to accomplish a project. You might have a resource investigator, someone who finds out information and ideas, and then a team worker, which is someone who is down to the actual getting the work done. We can also have action-oriented roles, and these can be categorized by shaper, implementer, completer, finisher. A shaper is someone who looks for patterns within team tasks and emphasizes completion. So they see that these certain patterns occur, and to them, it makes a lot of sense to capitalize on those patterns and to try to get the job done efficiently. The implementer likes to turn abstract ideas into concrete deliverables. So this is someone who is kind of an ideas person, likes to think about the abstract and then see how that can translate into a concrete physical deliverable. And finally, the completer or finisher is someone who stresses attention to details and quality of work. Now, all of these different roles are necessary for a healthy team. Finally, we can have a category of team roles called cerebral roles, and these are comprised of monitor, evaluator, innovator, and specialist. So the monitor evaluator is someone that would keep the team on task and usually does that through critique of poor decisions and flaws in reasoning. The innovator is someone who thinks creatively and stresses innovation and is a big picture person, big ideas person. And then the specialist is someone who contributes special skill and knowledge to the team. So someone who has a certain skill set that maybe no one else on the team has, and of course can provide that in the implementation and getting the work done. So of the different categories of team roles, how do you see yourself? Are you more in the category of people-oriented roles such as coordinator, research investigator, or a team worker? Are you more aligning yourself with an action-oriented role such as a shaper, an implementer, or a completer, finisher? Or finally, do you identify better with cerebral roles such as monitor, evaluator, innovator, or specialist? Which role or roles most characterize your personality and your abilities? It's good for you to think about that as you get ready to work on a team and work with other individuals so that you can emphasize your strengths and minimize your weaknesses. Okay, the final stage is performing, and this is the actual planning to complete the project. And as you work together as a team, then you'd want to define your project mission and objectives, determine what the subject is. In other words, what have you been asked as a team to do, or what have you not been asked to do? What are the parameters or boundaries of the project? What's the purpose? This is also sometimes known as the mission statement. Who are the readers or your clients? What is the context surrounding this particular project? So we've talked about context before, but what are those physical, economic, political, and ethical factors that influence this particular project? And then, of course, you want to identify what the project outcomes are. So what are those tangible results of the project? You want to be able to convert any of your objectives into measurable results and specify the deliverables that the project will produce. Okay, that was a look at Tuckman's 4 stages of teaming, and I hope that this will be useful to you as you are getting ready to work together on teams, and you will be asked to think about those 4 different stages, and especially in the conflict resolution, conflict management stage there, thinking about how you can effectively work with other people and work towards a goal of producing a product. All right, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thanks.